My friends, welcome back to another episode of PostScript Insights. One of the things that I've learned over the years that may not surprise you is that governments don't tell you the truth. They lie to you. And they lie to you when they're trying to hide something. You know, there are a number of examples that come to mind. I remember back in the Vietnam War period where the Tonkin Gulf incident, if you're of a certain age, you may remember that, where supposedly these patrol boats came up and shot at a couple of our destroyers. And that was the basis on which Lyndon Johnson used to start the whole Vietnam War. Even though he said, for all I know, they were looking at whales out there. I mean, whatever it is, somebody wanted to start that war. I had a friend of mine, Jim Stockdale, who was flying an F-8, a Crusader, at altitude over the top of the whole thing at the time, and looked down and he said there weren't any patrol boats. But nevertheless, and the government knew that, but nevertheless, they used the opportunity to accomplish what they wanted to do, which is start a war, and they lied about it. They lied about the Iraq War, right? Remember when Colin Powell was fed all of the information about the fact that the presumed fact that the Iraqis had weapons of mass destruction, and he went up to the UN and held up his papers and did all of this stuff and convinced everybody that they had nuclear or chemical weapons or whatever it was, and that they were coming after us, and that was the basis to start the war. Even though, in retrospect, what you find out is that it was all lies, that there were no weapons of mass destruction, and they had made the whole thing up because they needed an excuse for something else. In this particular case, starting the war. That whole kind of process came to mind to me again when in early last year, 2020, when the whole COVID business kind of hit. In February of 2020, I did a video, an hour and 20-minute video, and then I called it "It's an Op." It's an operation. It's an intelligence operation. It had all of the outlines that early of an intelligence operation. And one of the things that gave it away, as far as I was concerned, I mean, there were a number of things, but one of the things that gave it away was the fact that the U.S. government, through their proxies in the media, just went to general quarters screaming all over the world for over and over again for a long time. It's the Chinese did it. It's coming out of China. It's the Chinese. And what I know from experience is that whenever they're trying to hide something, they spend a great deal of effort, just like they did in Vietnam and in Iraq and everything, trying to sell an alternative story. They lie. And they tell this big alternative story that's all designed to generate fear and make you fearful, and cede to them the capability or the necessity to start this violence and these wars or whatever it is that they want to do. And if you'd asked me to guess about what happened in terms of the beginning of this whole COVID thing, I would have to guess, just based upon those dynamics, that it was an op. It was an op by the United States to try to damage, to hurt China in a significant way. And they, however they did it, probably started this whole thing over there in China and then tried to take it to town and blame everybody for it. And that was why, by the way, Fauci and all of these so-called scientists and academics who were working and administrators who were working on this were adamant that the press and that nobody else should explore the whole possibility that this could have come out of a laboratory. And they said it was it's a rat's nest, or I forget the imagery that they used, but they said this is only going to cause us more problems. The reason it was going to cause them problems is because it was a CIA op, and they had funded and been a part of the whole process of gain of function, weaponizing this supposed virus that they are then you're going to use for this biological, it effectively is a biological attack. And so the narrative, the principal narratives, when they really become large and they, within the process, the original one about this all came out of China. When they really kind of pull out all their stops and go after it, then that's the indication that tells you that there's another story and they're trying to hide something. Now, that's interesting background, it seems to me, relative to something that I just came upon 2 days ago. Cliff High, who you may know, and if you don't, you should look him up. CLIFHIGH. Cliff High, who has an amazing kind of track record of being able to predict futures based upon some extraordinary kind of technology that he's developed. Cliff High came up, and he does little video blogs on a regular basis, like almost every day these days. Cliff High came up a couple days ago and said, this is a kind of a magic thing, or what, I forget the title it is. I'll put the link down below this video so that you can look at it, and you should watch it because it's central to the whole idea. But what Cliff High said is, this is really weird, but it's a warning. It's a weird warning, I think is what he called it, a warning of weirdness or something. And what he said was that he started off by saying, I'm not a psychic. At least I don't think I'm a psychic. But he says, I'm very intuitive, and I've honed my intuition over years of doing Aikido and other kind of things so that I'm sensitive to my body and my thoughts and how the whole system works and, anomalous things that happen and so on. And he said about within the last 3 weeks, a strange thing happened. I had this fleeting kind of feeling, and it happened very quickly, that there was this kind of warmth and acceptance about getting the COVID shot. And it was so antithetical to how I feel about this thing that almost instantaneously it kind of turned into this very negative feeling about what the contents of the inoculation were. And that it started like this warm kind of thing, and then it went to the negative thing. And he said it was enough of an anomaly that I noticed that happened very quickly. And he said, so I stick it in the back of my mind. And then he said, like a week later or something, it happened again. And it was this kind of warm, strange, he calls it a warm, strange feeling kind of thing that's really accepting of this whole idea of a vaccine. And but then, as he describes himself, he says, I'm really paranoid. And what I'm really paranoid, I mean, he says, I'm just paranoid. That's my kind of state, my common state. But I'm really paranoid about what's inside of the vaccine shot and what it would do to me. And so uh, this kind of feeling of warmth and acceptance translated into one of this revulsion kind of about what was or wasn't inside of the shot. And he said, so 2 times is, you know, that's interesting that it should come up. And I didn't think too much more about it. But he said the 3rd time it happened, it was when I was falling asleep and I was right in that space between being awake and going to sleep. And then it was more acute and it was more specific and it was exactly the same kind of theme and the same idea. But he had the time because he had seen this before and he was experienced and remembered that he was able to kind of address it. I kind of think about it or access it or something. Nevertheless, it was very, very quick. And the thing that was important to him, and which is important to me because it's the basis of how you think about the future, is that once you start to get about 3 of these things, you get a pattern. You start to get a clustering of ideas, and that clustering, when it comes multiple times from different sources, for instance, and from different places, all starts to suggest to you the emergence of something that's of importance. And he had the last time it happened, it was a couple of days before he made this video, which would have been on Sunday. I think the video was on Wednesday and or Tuesday maybe. And he said what really brought it home was I then started to get emails, unsolicited emails from psychics, from individuals that I know who are working psychics in one place or another, who all said there is a message that is being transmitted that says, no, it's okay to take get the shot, get the vax, it's going to be okay. And all of these folks are saying, this is really an anomaly, and this is not the regular way I get messages, and I can tell by the voice that it's different, and it's something is sending messages to people saying that it's a good time and it's okay and putting these things into your mind. And like I said, he said 6 different people, all in kind of the northern hemisphere, reported independently to him that the same kind of messages were coming in. Only in their particular case, because they were more sensitive to it and they could kind of explicate it more completely than these rapid kind of images or ideas that kind of went through Cliff. And I looked at that and I thought about that and I said, now that's pretty interesting. Because I know a little bit about some of the things that the exotic technologies that the intelligence community and the government and the military have, and that are out in the open. I mean, you got to dig around, and the reason why I know more about it, perhaps than others, is because I have been exposed and dug around a little bit about the things. But I know that they can put voices in your brain so that they can give you ideas. They have technologies, very advanced technologies that most people don't know anything about, that to influencing you in very kind of fundamental kind of ways, and where you think that you're making your own decisions. In fact, you're being highly influenced to make the kind of decisions that they're interested in. And I had never occurred to me that, in fact, that kind of technology was being deployed in any kind of broad-based kind of way, and certainly not around major kind of global events or national events. I always kind of thought that they used it specifically for unique kind of situations where they wanted to influence some person or something. I mean, I don't know anything about this firsthand. I just know a little bit about the basic kind of technologies. And so I hadn't thought about this. And so when it showed up, when the idea showed up, I said, wow, if they pulled out that kind of stuff and are using it, then they are really hard pressed. They are really trying hard to pull something over and do something to the American public in this particular case. That is not what their objective is. They're lying. This is the classic kind of deal. And I immediately realized that, this amazing kind of campaign that they're doing to try to get everybody vaccinated for something that literally the CDC and the WHO says is equivalent to the usual seasonal flu. They literally say that. And for which there have been no increases in deaths year over year. There's no pandemic. You can't support that. The media is driving this all. And when the media comes on all together with the common theme and then just repeat it and repeat it and repeat it, that is the characteristic of the government trying to sell you something because there's another agenda that's underneath the whole thing. And so it was an interesting kind of notion, an idea that I hadn't thought about that just showed up. And so I picked up the phone and I called my friend Penny Kelly, who some of you may know is a good friend who's been out to our transition talks here in Berkeley Springs a number of times. And as a matter of fact, will be here this weekend and is our speaker. Penny is a very adroit psychic and is a source of kind of amazing kind of information often. And so I often kind of call her and ask her and say, what do you think? And so I called her and I said, have you been talking to Cliff High? Because I know that in the past that she's had some communications with Cliff. And I wondered whether she was one of the sources that Cliff had been talking to. She said, no, I haven't. I said, well, let me tell you what he's talking about. So I told her the little story. She said, well, that's really quite interesting because I'm getting the same things. She says, I've had 3 different people who are in her network who are studying intuition. She teaches intuition courses and workshops and stuff. And 3 different people from other places and around the world who have all come to her specifically and said, they're projecting these messages. They're sending out these messages. I've heard it at different times, this explicit, specific message. And that's intriguing because if in fact they are so interested in getting everybody to take this vaccine, what it means is that there's something really big that they're trying to cover up, that they're trying to, they're accomplished without you knowing it. And in this particular case, with you kind of making your own decision that this is what you want to do. And the idea that this kind of technology is operational starts to raise all kinds of other questions. First of all, it has no utility at all unless it's directionable. Unless you can point it at something, at some small group or some other kind of thing, or uh, it's maybe you can open the aperture way up and it goes all over the place. But in particular, it's really valuable if it's selective. Now, Cliff makes the case that it's not 5G and it's not whatever, uh, and he's likely true. Penny said that she's not had this experience, but she's down in rural southwestern Michigan, and there aren't a lot of people around there, and so maybe it's related to population centers. But the more interesting notion is that it is related to people who have specifically not yet taken the vaccine. Now, I don't know. Nobody's done any kind of survey. They've gone around to these psychics to find how many of them have not taken the vaccine. But if you went around and you talked to them and they all said, no, none of us have, then you'd start to say, woo, they have a technology, the ability to potentially, maybe, to target individuals based upon what they know about them, and do that at what almost, it's not subliminal, but it's kind of a sub-audible kind of level where these notions show up in your mind and you kind of think, hey, that's not a bad idea. What Cliff said was the thing that also encourages him to believe that there's something going on is he says, I have friends who were hard over anti-vaxxers. That is to say that they didn't want to take this vaccine. And they went and they took it. And now he says they're making all these kind of stupid excuses and trying to explain why they did what they previously thought was a stupid idea. Then I remember that there's an acquaintance of mine from New York who has quite a following, author, so on, who sent out a note a week ago that said, I really had apprehension about this whole vaccine, but I finally decided I'd do it. And you start to say, wow, how does that work? With the increasing amount of information that's about the potential disastrous implications and effects of this vaccine, it does these spike proteins, and they can do blood clots, and they go to your brain and then your heart, and it's guaranteed that almost everybody that gets one of these shots is going to have severe, if not mortal, kind of problems within 2 to 3 years. And I mean, this stuff is starting to build, and so it's almost like they're pulling at the biggest guns they got in order to try to keep this thing going and keep it alive. And so I guess the bottom line and the admonition comes out of this thing is that if you've been on the fence about a COVID vaccine and you really didn't think you were going to do that, it didn't make sense, but now you can, for some reason or another, decide thinking, well, maybe I better do it. You better be careful about think twice about where that idea is coming from and whether it's kind of logical and it really makes sense. The other point, of course, is that what else do they have, and how else are they using it to generate all of the foment and the disruption and the chaos and the other things that have been going on across the planet, certainly, but in general, but certainly in the United States over the last few months. And what's that whole objective? Which, of course, could be a subject for another session here. So that's what I've been thinking about for the last couple of days.
If you found that helpful and interesting, and you haven't done so already, why don't you just click on the link below and give us your email so that we can send you alerts for the next segments of PostScript. We'd love to be able to tell you beforehand when things are coming downstream so you don't have to go look for them. And this is the best way to do that. We assure you that we won't share your information with anyone else. Thanks.